Hey everyone, Randy here. On today's episode, we have a conversation with Neil Scott. Neil is a longtime libertarian who has decided to run for the United States Senate representing the state of Nevada. We talk about his campaign as well as his position on eliminating the income tax. Before we get to the conversation, I do want to mention that this episode has been brought to you by the Libertarian Party of Nevada. The Nevada LP wants to preserve and expand what the Founding Fathers call inalienable rights. Meet friendly, like minded people at LP Nevada events, volunteer, run for office, or donate to the Nevada LP and help take a stand for freedom. For more information, go to lpnevada.org. Once again, that's lpnevada.org. On to the show. It's the Battleborn Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Sadak. With me is Adam Heyman. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Randy, how are you?
Good, good. And today's guest, who we have on, is a candidate who's running for office as a libertarian. And Neil? Neil?
Hi,
Can you
Randy.
hear me? Okay. Hey, Neil. I'm sorry, I should give you your full name. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, so it's Neil Scott, and I'm here in Nevada running for the U.S. Senate
Fantastic. Fantastic. As a libertarian.
as a libertarian.
Yeah. Now, how did you come to the place where you're running as a libertarian? I mean, how did you evolve, or have you always been involved in politics, or can you give a little
Yeah,
background?
so I used to live in Florida, and this was back in the 80s and 90s. So I'm back then in Florida, there wasn't really a large libertarian presence.
Mhm.
Eventually, I moved to Nevada in 98, 99, and discovered the Libertarian Party and been here ever since. In 2002, I ran for a congressional district then, the newly created Congressional District 3, if you can imagine. Back then, that was a new district. Shows how much we've grown.
Oh, wow.
We're really doing great in this great state.
What was the condition? What did that cover? That CD3.
CD3 then covered Henderson as uh, the suburb. It was a suburban rural district back then.
Mm-hmm.
So it had the suburbs, and I think actually all the rest of the state. Congression District One was the city itself, and two was kind of the back then it was Green Valley. Sorry, not Green Valley, Summerlin, where I live now.
Hmm.
That was before Summerlin was quite as extensive as it was. So um, we've become more urbanized. And then they've split off CD4, I think, into Reno. Well, Reno is also growing, Washoe and those counties. And I
Hmm.
think Congress 4 now entails that that area, if I'm not mistaken. But
Sure, sure.
I was in Henderson, and CD3 fell into the new congressional district back then.
Okay. Adam, you had a question?
Yeah, Neil. So it sounds like you've been interested, or your political interest have leaned libertarian as far back as your time in Florida in the 80s and 90s. I was just curious what your political journey was. Did you burst forth from the womb as a libertarian, or what did you think when you grew up, or how did your views change over time?
No, well, when I grew up in, I'm from Jamaica originally, born in Jamaica and moved to the US in uh, 86. Politics in Jamaica are a little bit different, but my leanings then was always towards the more free market. They have two parties also. One is more free market, pro USA, and one was more back then, at least when I was growing up. One was more pro socialist, communist, leaned a little communist. So I'd always kind of leaned more free market capitalist. And like I say, when I moved to the States and I ended up, I went to Florida. Um, that's
How
what,
old were you when you emigrated?
20.
20. Okay.
Yeah. And then when I became a citizen, I immediately registered as a Republican back then in Florida. So,
Did you have was it difficult, or did you have any problems trying to get from Jamaica to here as as an immigrant, or because that would have been what, the 80s, I guess?
yeah,
Is that when? Uh-huh.
80, 86 was when I moved
Okay.
here.
Can
Um,
you talk about that as far as like what your experience was?
no, it was fairly easy. It was a fairly easy transition. My mom's family, most of them had immigrated. Her older brothers had immigrated to Canada. One brother immigrated to the United States. Her oldest brother had immigrated to New York, and he filed our papers. Um, and it was pretty straightforward. We went to the embassy in Jamaica. You know, you did all your paperwork and everything. They processed you and came to the U.S. and it was really a choice between New York and Florida, and I'm definitely just averse to the cold. So Florida, and Florida, back then too. If you can imagine when my mom's oldest brother moved to the States, they were still going. Jim Crow was probably still rampant and stuff. So the South wasn't a good option back then. But the United States has also changed for the better, and so now most people from Jamaica actually migrate to Florida, and I call Miami Kings. They call it Kingston 13. It's no difference really. If you guys have ever been to Miami, you know, you're in the Caribbean. You're on an island, pretty much in a Caribbean island. So
Well, there is the very vocal Cuban population, right? I mean, there's a lot of those as well, right?
yeah.
In Miami.
Hmm.
Do you think that informed what your views are, or you said that you were more, I guess you were more free market oriented before you even got here
Yeah.
to the United States?
Before I even got here.
Hmm.
The
Did
big
you?
thing with, by the way, sorry, I should tell you, the big thing with going to Florida was to go to college. And my parents actually w- wanted me to move back to Jamaica. And I did for a couple of years, and then I came back to the States. I just love it here. That's when I came to Nevada, actually. I love it here. I
Yeah,
went
you
back,
said it was like around 2000. You said when you came to Nevada.
1999, 98 to be exact.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Oh,
September
oh,
98,
cool.
I came to Nevada and been here since. I
Now, is there, because you're running as a libertarian, are there anything is there anything specific that touch that push your buttons as far as like issues that really, like, you go, man, you know what, this is the way, or anything that influences you as far as why you're running for office?
so my the what really grabbed me as a libertarian, as opposed to a Republican, was our stance on the federal income tax. I believe, and I describe it in my website as a slave tax. And the Libertarian Party is the only party that supports a constitutional amendment to abolish the income tax. Republicans talk a good talk, but they love the money, the spending and the money just as much, and they'll never do it. But a constitutional amendment to abolish the income tax is really what sealed the deal.
Can
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was just wondering if you wanted to expound on that, especially as it gets your get your idea of the lay of the land as far as running in 2020. And I know it's too early to know exactly who your opponents are going to be, but you must have given it a little bit of thought. What your candidacy, what your race is going to look like this time around.
Yeah. There's well, like I said, when I ran for Congress in 2002, it's the same issue: abolish the federal income tax. Back then, there was a group called the Fair Tax that was actually proposing uh, the same thing. They had a little different take on how to structure the taxes afterwards, but that still remains my main issue. And I think the only thing that has changed since then to now is we've seen how the spending has just gotten totally out of control. I mean, when I ran originally, people used to talk about the debt clock. And if you remember, Ross Perot had
Hmm.
ran before. He ran also on spending. And last year, we passed a $5 trillion budget, and nobody said anything. It just passed Congress.
It's just a number, right? What's the
Yeah,
difference? Four, five, six?
yeah.
Who cares?
Who cares? And they passed a $5 trillion budget in January, February, March. In March, and they've gone back and requested 50 billion more dollars. I
Right.
mean, I don't know. It just, you can't even imagine it. I don't think people understand what $5 trillion is.
I think it's impossible for us to understand it. We weren't evolved to understand a number that big.
Yeah, and we seem to think it can go on forever. And we're seeing some of the, and I just think this is the we're just beginning to see the effects of this just out of control spending or
Yeah, I
debt.
think you're right.
Or I did finance, like I said, when I went to Florida, that was one of the main reasons. And our debt to GDP, our national debt has exceeded the size of our economy. If this was a business, you would be in bankruptcy court. It it's just unsustainable. Um, and I think that's one of the biggest issues facing our country now. When this thing gets corrected, if you don't do it voluntarily and you let outside forces impose the correction on you, it is not going to be pretty. Let me tell you that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's for sure.
and we're looking at some serious structural economic issues going forward.
Well, is there because the national debt is so it's we're talking about unfathomable numbers, but is there a math like I remember reading this a while back, but mathematically there's just no way to overcome the debt that we have. I mean, we're basically in default now, aren't we? I mean, regardless of if
Well,
we turn things around.
when you have the legal ability to counterfeit the money, it gives you a few more options
This is
at the
true.
Right,
expense of everybody that uses dollars, most especially the citizens.
right, exactly. So, like I said, if you were a business, you would have been in bankruptcy. Your assets would not equals your liabilities and your equity, but because the government can print money, then they just keep increasing their their asset side of the equation. But then that translates into that money has to find somewhere to go. And we've seen where every time there's a new financial crisis, because that money has gone into what you would call irrational spending somewhere. It's Um,
Inflationary
Malinvestment.
asset bubbles, usually.
right,
Yeah.
it's inflationary asset bubbles, and we keep talking about we had the real estate bubble in 2008, but there were other bubbles before that. You had the dot com, you had long term capital management where foreign exchange, there was a foreign exchange bubble, and that blew up. Now we're
I think one of our biggest bubbles now is the price of higher education.
higher education. We're seeing where all the costs just keep going up and up and up for the average person, and it's an illusion that things are getting better. They're actually getting worse. Our quality of life and spending on things we actually need to spend on, mental illness, you know, health for our citizens, all these things uh, have just gone down the drain, and these asset bubbles just keep exploding. Then they pop, and you print more money, and another bubble happens, and it pops. So at some point, there's going to be a big bubble pop, so to speak.
It sure would be nice to get the federal government back on a budget, but every time that starts to even become a threat, they always pull the least egregious government services first.
Yeah.
They'll shut down things to help you. They'll shut down the national park before
Exactly.
they you know
But
slow down the empire or all the money they spend.
yeah, they want to send what, a trillion, another whatever it is, like 40 billion
30 billion,
dollars
I
or
think
30.
33
Yeah,
billion
today. That was a
to
Yeah,
matter of today or
Ukraine.
yesterday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
with a B. How
Yeah.
can that possibly be in the interest of the American people? It would be just lovely to get someone in the Senate that, like you, Neil, that feels that way. I know you're a little early to be campaigning yet, but hopefully this podcast will be a way for you to introduce yourselves to Nevada's libertarian voters. Is there anything you want to say to them, or introduce yourself, or give a little stump speech? Or
Uh,
the floor is yours. What's on your mind?
yeah. Like I said, and I just want libertarians to know. First thing is, you know, steady the course. Like I said, I've been with the party since 2000 and well, sorry, 1999 actually. Wow, seems
That's amazing.
yeah. But we're back then. I don't. We were, I think, in only 33. Well, let's look at the biggest measure for a political party. It's ballot access, right? Uh,
Yes.
last election cycle, and the one before, presidential election cycle, we had ballot access to in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Back when I joined the party, I forget how many states we had ballot access for in the presidential election. Um, so if you look at just growth overall, the party is growing, and that's part of our the national, especially at the national level, that's their main mantra: the fastest growing political party in the United States. So we're making progress there, and we should steady the course. On issues, we've also influenced issues, which is where we've had some real success. We've really influenced issues heavily because back, as I say, when I joined in '98, um, marijuana wasn't legal in any state, and not one of the major parties were even discussing it. Um, we were the only party back then, advancing legalization of marijuana as an issue. And when the other parties, especially the Democrats, realized this is an issue, we've seen how it's changed that debate already. So um, I just want people to know, have faith, steady the course. You know, they're doing what they should be doing at the national level. At the state level, we're growing. We have 25 candidates for office this year, the most in the party's history, and we're steadily growing. So we're doing we're what would we say? We're putting it down. Let's just say that. So that would be my message to libertarians. Um, keep the faith, and we're growing. This year there's some enormous factors. We're still not in the big game for raising money, but that's because of structural issues, winner take all, for candidates, for electoral nominations and all that. The two parties have rigged, you know, access to for third parties to get their voice out.
That's
The
true.
debate side I see this year for um the next presidential debates, the Republicans have said they're not going to participate. So let's see what happens, eh, this year and then 2 years from now.
Do you now on the your website, Article 28, you don't mention the Federal Reserve at all, and we had talked about print the like the how they're printing money earlier. Um, I'm guessing that you are against having the Federal Reserve print money, but you don't really mention it on your website, article28.com.
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve, that's actually a very tricky issue. Because what most people don't know, the Federal Reserve is actually supposed to be a private entity almost. It's a reserve bank for banks. The problem is when you come to that printing money issue. Um, and that's why the income tax is so important. If it was just a reserve bank for banks, inherently there isn't anything wrong with the Federal Reserve. It's when they start printing money that allows them to originally, if you might, okay, let's go back to the history of the Federal Reserve. Originally, the assets they were supposed to hold was only state issued bonds, government bonds. Banks had to deposit. There's no account at a bank at the Federal Reserve, really. They just hold those assets themselves. I used to do reserve banking accounting. The problem is when you allow the government to start printing money and giving it to banks. If you got rid of the income tax, they couldn't print money. They would have to maintain a reserve system that's pretty much in balance. So there, if the federal, to put without getting technical, if the Federal Reserve operated the way it was supposed to, then that would be fine. It would be just banks holding reserves for other banks and they lend it to other banks. It's when you start printing money, and that's what they do when they inflate these asset bubbles. They inflate the asset bubble, it bursts, the banks get irrational, it bursts, and then they print money and bail the banks out. Normally, what would happen is if you have an asset bubble and you can't print the money, that bank would close. And then with with the deposit insurance, they would transfer the assets to another bank. But I'm not inherently opposed to a Federal Reserve, but and there's also a danger if you don't have a reserve banking system. You don't want to collapse. You remember the Federal Reserve was put in after the Great Depression. If you had, say, if you kept, say, things that were put in at that same time, like Glass Steagall and all the legislation that followed, inherently the Federal Reserve is a private bank and the government would just act as a mediator. Today, the government has started to tilt the scales, pretty, if you want to to describe it as, you know, to put it in layman's terms, I guess. They now have
Yeah,
to come on the scales.
I think since it's a monopoly, its mission became to circumvent market forces from the very first year. When did it start? 1913.
Same year as the income tax.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was right. That was the original date, but it really became the reserve banking system we have today really took off after the Great Depression.
yeah, they definitely were more active. Since originally they were only supposed to hold state notes, federal notes, you must
Uh,
have been hopping mad after 2008 when they started buying mortgage-backed
oh,
securities and any other toxic
the
nonsense
oh, you
at
said to
par.
flip
I think it was at par
the
value too. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yell and scream and shake that fist.
yeah, they have gotten, but that's what happened, right? They started to remove all the safeguards slowly over time, and it became a I don't even know what you call it now, but yeah, they've just gone totally out of control now, and that's why you have these 5 trillion, 20, 30 trillion, the national debt overall. The deficit is one this year is going to be a $2 trillion deficit.
Well, the
Yeah.
other thing. Oh, go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Randy. Yeah, when you say why do they do it or is it such a shame, I just think they're a monopolist and it's in their nature. It's like the parable of the scorpion and the frog. I don't really blame the scorpion. I blame the frog for not knowing the nature of a scorpion. We
A
should not give
scorpion.
these institutions this kind of power. Of course, they're going to abuse it. Are
And
we stupid?
yeah, and also it goes back to the other thing where you said, why am I running? Congress has just abdicated their
Yeah,
responsibility
they have. Yeah, they have.
completely. I mean, I don't even know why we bother, to be honest with you. They don't even read the Constitution. So the problem, like I say, is structural. If the Federal Reserve operated the way it did, and it only held state, federal, and not even so much municipal, but even if you threw in municipal bonds, and it was just banks lending banks overnight, that's totally acceptable because of the way the economic, the business cycle works. Um, but they've just gone totally out of control. You'd ask,
Absolutely.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Neil. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to give you
Oh,
another platform. I know you're running on ending the income tax, and obviously you want to restrain fiscal spending, as that's a natural corollary. Is there anything else that you're going to push as a major issue, or are you just going to point to how awful your opponents are and sit back and laugh?
um, well, the problem is I've been trying to, and one of the things, like, and if you can imagine, most of my family and friends are like, well, why don't you join one of the major parties and do what you want there? The both major parties have just lost their way. Um, so it's not even just sitting back and laugh. It's actually fairly serious. And um, the Libertarian Party still has maintained is still the party of principles, and it's the only place where I really find that people still adhere to the true principles. You could go and join. I could go and join the Republican Party, and then I'd pay lip service to, yeah, we want to get rid of the income tax and blah blah blah, and then I just go into committee. Sky's the limit. Whatever you want. You want to 700
Yeah,
what $800 billion defense bill, sure. uh, I'll take a defense bill, you take your social welfare bill, and we sing kumbaya, and we all move on, and to hell with the principles.
I
So
totally agree. As much as I hate the Democratic Party and disagree with everything they stand for, well, almost everything, I hate the Republicans much, much worse. Because when they're out of power, they pretend to be me. And then when they
Yeah.
gain power, they act just like progressives with a slightly different list of cronies that they're going to shovel money
that
at.
that they're going to show, right, exactly. um and that's why it's become a one party state in Washington DC.
Yep.
One thing I should tell people is, in 2008, actually, just before the market crash, I'd moved to Washington, D.C., because I was going to go to Washington, D.C., and I was optimistic. And I said, if you go to Washington, D.C., it's going to be deep political debate like when our founding fathers, you think, you imagine Jefferson and Madison, all those guys forming deep political thought. No.
No, no. You get disabused of that notion right away.
Real quick. We're a plantation country now. Washington, D.C. is the plantation house, and we're all the slaves feeding it, you know, just sending our paychecks there every
Yeah.
month. And
Yep.
people cannot imagine the opulence and the corruption in DC. When I got there and I was looking for a job, and people would ask me, well, why did you leave Nevada and come to DC? And I said, well, I wanted to get this grassroots organization off to abolish the income tax. That's it. Forget it. You're never going to get a job there saying that. Okay? So the first thing people should realize is it's not even political discussion there. It's send your money and then we'll dictate to you what should happen in your life. So that was the first thing when I got there. And then when you see the opulence, you just realize we're in a plantocracy right now. Um, and it's sad because the five, no, it's actually six now. Six of the wealthiest counties are in the Metro DC area, and not one of them manufacture a product or a service other than government. That's
It's
it.
like when the Roman Empire, everything would go to Rome, like all the
Everything
whatever
goes
you
to
want to call
Rome.
it, the loot or the whatever, it would just go end up out there. And Rome was, as you were saying, like Washington D.C. is, it's very opulent, and that's where all the money and the power is.
Yeah, and it's just unimaginable. I mean, I would tell people go to DC. Don't go to the 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 monuments are fine and everything, but drive around. Rent a car, drive to the surrounding counties. Um, it's just unbelievable. Um, how, what it's like, and it's a one-party city.
Yeah.
Um, and there's no concern or care about and for there's no concern or care about the rest of the country.
That's
Um,
for sure. And they control the educational process, so they keep indoctrinating the new citizens into believing. Boy, if I could go back in time into my fifth grade social studies class, I would slap Mrs. whatever her name was right in the face. That's just an adorable little lie about how our system works with checks and branches and the co equal branches of government and the jealousy of power. And yeah, nice story.
yeah, it's
Speaking of education, it's funny because I was just thinking in my lifetime, the Department of Education didn't even exist, right? And it
Right.
was Ronald Reagan who ran on even abolishing the Department of Education. And to show you how how what the bureaucratic what just the inability to do substantive changes,
They don't want
once
to.
that, it never happened. Ronald Reagan got into office. He did that get abolished? No. And it
Well,
was a relatively new department.
as Neil was alluding to earlier, I do think that libertarian principles that we've held for decades are finally starting to seep out and be adopted by the other
Oh,
two
I think so
parties
too.
and by the populace as a whole. I think public education and the Department of Education are looked at much more with much more suspicion than they ever have before. I think the bulk of the population, even though they're being propagandized about Ukraine, I think they're anti-war. I think they know they're being lied to. The Democrats are finally starting to, like Neil on his Facebook page is talking about the governor of Colorado, he's clearly a Democrat, but he has some very clear libertarian leanings too. And I think all across the country that's starting to become a thing. I think even the right are starting to value decentralization, and maybe the time is right now that we maybe are strong enough, or the lever is small enough that we can push it and actually accomplish something.
Well, the other thing is that just going to the grocery store or going to the gas pump, you are looking at this inflation, which officially is like 8 something percent, but that's what the official number is. But it is way more than that. I think everybody could agree if you just take a look, that there's something very, very wrong as far as how much this money or the dollar has been debased. And it's because of the Federal Reserve, like we've been talking about, and also this government spending.
Yep, that's why we need to get Neil elected.
Yeah, and
Neil, you're gonna have to go in there with a an axe or a chainsaw, and
A
then just start.
bodyguard.
Yeah, and a bodyguard.
I I work every day and say, how can I defeat? Well, that's one of the reasons too why I'm going to try and do, internet campaign. And like you say, hopefully this year, maybe people will see it, but we've got to do something because, and hopefully the citizens are now realizing it would be a tragedy if they're just now realizing what it's costing them. I mean, we shouldn't have to go through this. I mean, we're the best people in the world. America has
Oh,
been good to me. The American people have been good to me. I'm not one of those, oh, I hate America. And, America's got problems like everywhere else, but we really shouldn't be. Um, and there's no need to be going through this, the, to be going through what we're going through now. We're not deserving of, well, I shouldn't say we're not deserving of it because if you if you go to my website, I have a phrase on there, um which our founding fathers realized when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. And it says, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the government to which they have become accustomed. Um, and we're suffering evil, or we're really suffering. But somebody said people love comfort and will suffer in comfort. You know the story about, like you said, the frog and the scorpion. But there's also the one, would if you put a frog in a pot of water, of cold water, and no, if you just drop a frog in hot water, it'll immediately try to jump out. But if you put it in a pot of, room temperature water and you turn up the heat, it'll just stay there till it boils.
yeah.
It's
And that,
so true. And if you give that frog Netflix, he'll even vote for his own oppressor.
oh yeah,
That's
it'll be like,
true.
turn the heat up a little more.
That's right. Turn it up. I'm cold.
Yeah, and we're like I said, we shouldn't have to suffer evil, but make no mistake, the powers that be aren't going to give it up. No nobody gives up power freely. Um, they're going to strike back. Um, but maybe this is too much for us. I keep saying, in 2008, I said, this is it. And what happened? You remember the Tea Party?
Mm-hmm.
They got co-opted real fast.
Yep, they did.
Yeah.
The Tea Party. What was the other one? Was it Occupy Wall
Occupy
Street?
Wall Street. Yeah,
They got co-opted.
Yeah.
they got just diverted. The woke ideology and identity politics just totally distracted them from what their whole point was.
Yeah. And they're gone, the shiny things over here.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's another thing. The good thing is the libertarians have remained steadfast and true. And when I was at the state convention, who was it? I think, yeah, the speech I think Jeff gave when he said, we're gonna uh, go to actually to the the national, and we're gonna hold their feet to the fire. That was good. So we've remained steadfast to our principles, and I'm with it. I'm in as much as I can help. The only thing I say I wish I had was $50 million. And if I did, I would spend it on a campaign. Um, I don't yet.
Well, we're going to start helping people fundraise, and I think 50 million is totally reasonable. I think we can achieve that.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
All right. So we're coming up here on the end of the time. Any final thoughts, Neil?
Um, On to victory. We don't deserve what we're going through now. Stay well, stay healthy, and just sometimes it's hard. But libertarians, we're making progress. Sometimes it's not obvious, but surely we're making progress. Maybe not fast enough, but stay true to the cause. What it says, stay true north, and eventually we will prevail.
That
Adam?
sounds great, Neil. Thanks very much for talking to us. I loved everything you had to say.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure. You guys, it's been great. Um, oh, the only thing I'd say is maybe Battleborn will start doing, now that we have video, we can start doing the live video feeds and stuff. By the way, the LP National does have live video. Sometimes they do on Facebook. I've seen a couple. So just a quick heads up.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
My last words, taxation is theft. And
Amen.
We are out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
This has been the Battleborn Podcast, brought to you by the Libertarian Party of Nevada. Check us out at our website, lpnevada.org, where you can learn more about us and about libertarianism, the greatest political philosophy known to man. At lpnevada.org, you can become a member, donate, volunteer, check out our upcoming events, or just sign up for our newsletter. Help us make the world a more free place, beginning right here in Nevada. That's lpnevada.org, the home of the Libertarian Party of Nevada.